Good morning, children. This is the third video lesson on your lesson, The Enemy. In the first two video lessons, we discussed Dr. Sadavo's early childhood life, his father's rearing up of him, and his meeting with Hannah at an American professor's house, and their marriage in Japan. And in the second video, we discussed one day while Dr. Sadavo and his wife were waiting the back courtyard of their house, they saw an American prisoner of war was washed ashore just behind their house. What they did was they took him into their house for operation or treatment, and then they told the servants to wash him, but they rejected. Now, in this video lesson, we are going to learn the rest of the story. If you didn't see the first two parts, subscribe channel, watch and come back. Let us go. Look at the next page. While she was thinking these thoughts, though not really liking the man better, now that he was no longer a child, she kept on washing him until his upper body was quite clean. So she was thinking about all these things about this man, and she cleaned his upper body quite clean, but she dared not to turn him over. He cleaned his face, chest, but he had no courage to turn this man over and look at the wound. Where was Sadavo? Now her anger was ebbing. Her emotion was ebbing up. And she was anxious again. And she rose, wiping her hands on the wrong towel. Then, lest the man be chilled, she put the quilt over him. Over his bared chest, he put that quilt over him. And looking for Sadavo, where he was, she asked herself. Sadavo, she called softly. She had been about to come in when she called. The moment she called, he entered there. His hand had been on the door and now he opened it. She saw that he had brought his surgeon's emergency bag and that he wore his surgeon's coat. Immediately, Dr. Sadavo came there with his surgeon's bag and the surgeon's coat. You have decided to operate? She cried. Yes, he said shortly. He turned his back to her and unfolded a sterilized towel upon the floor of the Tokonoma alcove and put his instruments out upon it. That was the mat kept in the room. He spread a white towel over there and spread his surgical instruments there. Fetch towels, he said. Then he told her, fetch towels. She went obediently, but how anxious now, to the linen shelves and took out the towels. She went there and took out the towels. There ought also to be old pieces of matting so that the blood would not ruin the fine floor covering. She thought, if she would get some mats that could be spread there to protect the floor and its covering. She went out to the back veranda where the gardener kept strips of matting with which to protect delicate shrubs on cold nights and took an armful of them. Immediately she went back courtyard where the gardener had kept some mattings there, the strips of matting. She took it and came back. But when she went back into the room, she saw this was useless. When she came back with the mats in her hand, she saw that those were useless there. The blood had already soaked through the packing in the man's wound and had ruined the mat under him. The mat had already ruined with the blood that came out of the packing of the wound. Oh, the mat, she cried. Yes, it is ruined, Sadavo replied, as though he did not care. Help me to tend him, he commanded her. Then he told her to help him to turn this man around. She obeyed him without a word, and he began to wash the man's back carefully. Then he washed him carefully. You may would not wash him, she said. Did you wash him then? Sadavo asked, not stopping for a moment his swift, concise movements. He started cleaning the man. When Hannah told him that Yumi did not do anything, but he continued his work, asking them then he should do it. Yes, she said. He did not seem to hear her, but she was used to his absorption. It was common with her. She used to feel this absorption of Sadavo in his works. Absorption means full engagement of his work that she was used to when he was at work. She wondered for a moment if it mattered to him what was the body upon which he worked so long as it was for the work he did so excellently. So he completely devoted his mind and body at his work. That Hannah knew very well. You will have to give the anesthetic if he needs it, he said. Then Dr. Sadavo requested help from Hannah that she should give the anesthesia. She repeated blankly. But never have I? It is easy enough, he said impatiently. He was taking out the packing now and the blood began to flow more quickly. After instructing her to prepare for giving the man the anesthetic, he removed the packing he took out the packing of the wound and the blood began to flow more quickly. He peered into the wound with the bright surgeon's light fastened on his forehead. His forehead he fastened with a surgeon's light. With that he studied the wound. The bullet is still there, he said with cool interest. Now I wonder how deep this rock wound is. Yes, he found the bullet was still there in his body. And now he wanted to know how deep the rock wound would be. If it is not too deep, it may be that I can get the bullet. If the wound was not so deep, he could easily take out the bullet, he thought. But the bleeding is not superficial. He has lost much blood. But the bleeding that was going on now, it was not a superficial one. It coming from inside. So this man had lost a lot of blood. He realized it. At this moment, Hannah choked. When she saw this wound and the blood and the opening of the wound, Hannah started choking. She couldn't get breath. He looked up and saw her face the color of sulfur. Immediately her face discolored. Don't faint, he said sharply. He did not put down his exploring instrument, but he couldn't stop it now. He started the operation. He couldn't stop in the middle. He continued. If I stop now, the man will surely die. She clapped her hands to her mouth and leaped up and ran out of the room. But Hannah couldn't stand there and watch all this. She put her hands over her mouth and ran away. Outside in the garden, he heard her retching. Retching means vomiting. She started vomiting. The sound of vomiting he heard. But he went on with his work. But Dr. Sadavo continued his work. It will be better for her to empty her stomach, he thought. Yes, it's better for her to empty her stomach because of the vomiting. He had forgotten that, of course, she had never seen an operation. This was the first time that Hannah saw an operation just in front of her. That's why she was vomiting. But her distress and his inability to do her at once made him impatient. But her distress and his inability to go to her at once made him impatient and irritable with this man who lay like dead under his knife. That he was in such a situation, he couldn't go behind Hannah and help her at this situation. So he formed a kind of dislike towards this man, towards this white man who was lying there like a dead body under his knife. This man, he thought, there is no reason under heaven why he should live. This was his thought. Why he should live? He couldn't understand. First he was shot by the gun, then the seize. Why he should live? Unconsciously, this thought made him ruthless. This thought made unconsciously, without his knowledge, he became a little bit ruthless. Ruthless means a little bit cruel, pitiless. And he proceeded swiftly. Then he moved swiftly upon the wound. In his dream, the man mourned, but Sadavo paid no heed except to mutter at him. Then in his dream here means in his unconscious state, he groaned. But Sadavo did not give any heed to it, any attention to it. Groan, he muttered. Groan if you like. I am not doing this for my own pleasure. In fact, I do not know why I am doing it. Then he, as his practice, while doing operations, he would speak himself. Then he said he was doing this not for his own pleasure. He was doing it to save his life, he said to himself. Then the door opened and there was Hannah again. Where is the anesthetic? She asked in a clear voice. So she was requested earlier that she should do the anesthetic. After vomiting, she came back and asked for the anesthetic medicine. Where is it? Sadavo mentioned with his chin. He showed her where it is with his chin. It is as well that you come back, he said. This fellow beginning to stir. Stir means move. It is good that you came back, because this fellow wanted to stir, he wanted to move. So better to make him unconscious. Give anesthetic. She had the bottle and some cotton in her hand. But how shall I do it? She asked. She didn't know what quantity she had to pour into the cotton. She asked him. Simply saturate the cotton and hold it near his nostrils. He told her, simply soak the cotton and hold it near his nostrils. That's enough. Sadavo replied without delaying for one moment the intricate detail of his work. He was very concentratedly doing his work with minute detail. He was trying to remove the bullet from his body. Simply saturate the cotton and hold it near his nostrils. Sadavo replied without delaying for one moment the intricate detail of his work. When he breathes badly, move it away little. This was the instruction Dr. Sadavo gave to Hannah. Soak the cotton with the anesthetic medicine and hold it just in front of his nostrils. And if the fellow felt any difficulty to breathe, remove it. That was the only thing Hannah had to do. Next paragraph. She crouched close to the sleeping face of the young American. She sat down so close to him, and it was piteously thin face, she thought, and the lips were twisted. The man was suffering whether he knew it or not. Watching him, she wondered if the stories they heard sometimes of the sufferings of prisoners were true. Then she sat down there and looked at the pitiful face of the young soldier. Then she remembered stories they heard sometimes of the sufferings of the prisoners were true or not, she thought. They came like flickers of rumor. Sometimes she thought those were simply rumors, told by word of mouth and always contradicted. She couldn't find any relation with the stories and the reality. It remained in her mind a contradicting thing. In the newspapers, the reports were always that wherever the Japanese armies went, the people received them gladly, with cries of joy at their liberation. But sometimes she remembered such men as General Takima, who at home beat his wife cruelly, though no one mentioned it now that he had fought so victorious a battle in Manchuria. So many rumors about the cruelties of these prisoners, the cruelties of the soldiers she heard, but she had not believed in those stories. Then she thought about this General Takima. He used to beat his wife very cruelly. But those stories were unheard now because he won victories for Japan. If a man like that could be so cruel to a woman in his power, would he not be cruel to one like this, for instance? So if such a soldier, such a general would be cruel to his own wife, would he not be cruel to this fellow like the prisoners of war, she thought. She hoped anxiously that this young man had not been tortured. That was her wish. This young man would not be tortured, she hoped. It was at this moment that she observed deep red scars on his neck just under the ear. When she thought this, she noticed the red scars on his neck under his ear because he was tortured. These marks told her he was tortured there. So look at this sentence. She was reasoning the cruelties the man would have faced or not in the custody of the Japan soldiers, the Japan camp. That was her doubt. As she was doubting, when she noticed the red scars just under his ears, she confirmed it. Those scars, she murmured, lifting her eyes to Sadako. But he did not answer. At this moment, he felt the tip of his instrument strike against something hard, dangerously. When she asked about these red scars, he didn't say anything because he was at the crucial moment of his operation. His knife hit something hard at the wound near the kidney. So it went up to the kidney, almost touching the kidney. All thought left him. He felt only the purest pleasure as a surgeon. He wanted to remove that without damaging the person. He probed with his fingers delicately, familiar with every atom of this human body. So he was so familiar with every atom of human body that made him a successful surgeon. His old American professor of anatomy had seen to that knowledge. He got it from that American professor. Ignorance of the human body is the surgeon's cardinal sin. Such his American professor used to tell in the class. If a surgeon doesn't know anything about the anatomy of human body, then it is a cardinal sin. He had thundered at his classes year after year to operate without as a complete knowledge of the body, as if you had made it. Anything less than that is murder. If you do operation in a human body without the clear knowledge of human body, without the knowledge of anatomy, that is not operation, it is called murder. His American professor used to remind his students. It is not quite at the kidney, my friend, Sadao murmured. It was his habit to murmur to the patient when he forgot himself in an operation. This was his practice. When he did operations with his patients, he talked to them, calling them friends and all that. He was lucky. This American soldier was lucky because it did not hit the kidney, the bullet. My friend, he always called his patients, and so now he did, forgetting that this was his enemy. And he used to call his patients friend, especially when he do the operation. But now he forgot that this was his enemy and not his friend, yet he called him friend. Then quickly, with the cleanest and most precise of incisions means surgical cut, the bullet was out. He took out the bullet from the man's body. The man shook, but he was still unconscious. Even though he shivered, he was still unconscious. Nevertheless, he muttered a few English words. Guts, he muttered, choking. They got my guts, my abdomen, they got. Some English words he uttered there, unconsciously. Sadao, Hannah cried sharply. Shh, Sadao said. The man sank again into silence so profound that Sadao took up his wrist. With this, I am going to wrap up the video. If you have any doubt, watch it again.